On March 14, 1945, as dawn broke over the Rhine's western banks, one American gunner uncovered a battlefield coordination trick so precise that it would erase an entire German Panzer Battalion in just 8 blistering minutes. The air was thick with fog, smoke, and the metallic taste of hours-old artillery fire as the 89th Infantry Division dug in for a counterattack they believed would crush them before sunrise. While most soldiers braced for another armored surge, Staff Sergeant William "Hawk" Delaney studied the sound patterns of approaching engines and quietly recalculated every firing angle his section had rehearsed for weeks. None of the men around him knew that in a few minutes, his unheard-of overlapping fire coordination would turn a lopsided German assault into one of the most abrupt armored breakdowns recorded in the closing months of the war. Delaney had earned the nickname Hawk months earlier not because of how he shot, but because of how he watched everything: smoke drift, track marks, tree lines, and the rhythm of incoming shells. He was a gunner who rarely fired first, preferring to wait until enemy armor committed to narrow ground where his calculations could fold around them like a steel trap. His squad's 57mm anti-tank gun was outmatched by late-war panzers, but he understood something German tank commanders didn't expect. Angles mattered more than caliber. For weeks, he drilled his men on a method that seemed almost academic: timed bursts from multiple guns staggered by split seconds to force enemy drivers into exposing their weakest armor. Most officers dismissed it as over-engineered theory, but Delaney trusted geometry more than luck, and he kept refining plans even when ammunition was scarce. The German armored group approaching their line that morning wasn't supposed to be a major force, but intelligence often lagged behind the speed of desperate late-war counterattacks. When scouts finally reported a full battalion of panzers rolling toward their ridgeline, Delaney's commanding officer's face collapsed with the realization that they had minutes, not hours, to survive what was coming. The gun crews scrambled, shoving ammunition into muddy hands, rotating cranks and repositioning barrels, while Delaney climbed onto a sandbag pile to study the armored column's spacing. To everyone's confusion, he didn't prepare to fire at the lead tank, but instead shouted coordinates to the left and rear guns, ordering them to aim into empty terrain. He knew that if the battalion followed standard tactical doctrine, their formation would tighten as they funneled between 2 battered farmhouses that formed a natural choke point. What he planned to do next would either save them all or be remembered as one of the strangest, shortest-lived battlefield theories ever attempted. Delaney had learned his concept by studying earlier clashes in the Ardennes, where American anti-tank crews were wiped out because they fired too soon and from too narrow a cone. German armor thrived when it forced defenders to fight in a straight line, because straight lines made every Allied gun predictable and individually weak. Delaney observed that when guns fired at slightly offset intervals and at non-intuitive angles, German tank commanders hesitated, believing they had stumbled into multiple ambushes. Even 2 guns firing in overlapping arcs could create the illusion of 4 or 5, which often forced armor to rotate turrets wildly, slowing the entire column. He noticed that hesitation, not accuracy, destroyed tank groups, because immobile armor was nothing more than a steel coffin waiting for a penetrator round. Historical reports from North Africa and Italy reinforce this idea. Whenever Allied gunners created cross-directional chaos, German panzers lost their initiative and became reactive targets instead of predators. But no American gunner had ever attempted to apply this pattern deliberately against an entire battalion, especially not one supported by mobile flak guns and armored half-tracks. The doctrine was untested at scale, and Delaney's men weren't certain whether his theory would work or collapse under the sheer weight of German steel. Still, the pattern was clear. Those who controlled confusion controlled survival, and Delaney intended to weaponize that confusion with mathematical precision. The Germans, expecting a typical American defense, unknowingly drove themselves straight into the jaws of the most complex ambush the unit had ever attempted. At 06:15 hours, the lead panzer crossed between the two farmhouses, and Delaney gave a command no one expected. "Second gun. Fire behind the column." The rearward explosion startled the German drivers, making them slam brakes and tighten their formation just as Delaney had predicted. Before they could recover, he ordered the left flank gun to fire not at the tanks, but into the stone wall beside them, showering the column with debris and blinding dust. The panzers halted instinctively, believing they were surrounded, but no enemy infantry existed in those positions at all. Delaney shouted for all guns to shift 10 degrees right and fire in overlapping bursts, creating intersecting shockwaves that confused German turret rotations. The tanks began to rotate toward phantom threats, exposing their thinner side armor to Delaney's central gun. His first true anti-tank round punched through the 2nd Panzer's side plate, igniting ammunition and turning the tank into a beacon of fire that illuminated the entire choke point. The battalion commander inside the 3rd tank attempted to push through, but another precisely timed overlapping burst forced him to halt again, trapping 5 tanks nose to rear. In that immobilized moment, Delaney unleashed a rapid sequence of shots that chained destruction down the line like falling dominoes. Within 4 minutes, half the battalion was burning, and still no German crew could identify how many American guns were firing or from where. The twist was devastating. The Germans weren't losing because of American firepower. They were losing because they had surrendered their movement to an illusion. By minute 8, the remaining tanks abandoned their armor and fled on foot, leaving steel giants smoldering in the fog like an armored graveyard. Delaney's overlapping fire coordination was later reviewed by ordnance officers who initially doubted the reports until they walked the battlefield and witnessed the impossibility firsthand. The after-action notes warned that while the method was brilliant, it required calm under pressure, absolute timing, discipline, and terrain awareness far beyond standard gunnery training. American training manuals never fully adopted his system, fearing misuse in hands unprepared for the split-second decisions it demanded. But the lesson remained. In modern warfare, control of perception can be deadlier than raw firepower. Delaney's 8-minute victory became a quiet legend within his division, studied informally by gunners who saw it as proof that innovation mattered more than equipment. The battlefield where it occurred was later photographed, showing a line of destroyed panzers that looked as if they had been frozen mid-charge by an invisible wall. For historians, the event serves as a reminder that even at the end of World War II, when resources were scarce and exhaustion was universal, brilliance could still rewrite the rules of survival. And for soldiers and strategists today, Delaney's story stands as a warning that the mind, not the machine, often determines the outcome of war.